This project is using a OLAP Cube sort of structure. So, and which we're using a pivot table, which essentially we're looking at a very minor amount of data, where a typical OLAP Cube would be looking at a mass amount of data and attempting to process that in a very efficient way. So if you're wanting to know what an OLAP Cube is, please refer to Chapter 9 for more details, but you can think of it this way. There are a set of questions that most finance departments may ask, or marketing departments, that are repeated over and over and over. And that set of questions has a set of answers that is a consistent compilation or a set of data that is supplied back to the end user. Now, you can go about it by querying a database, and if you have millions and millions of records and you run those queries against it, and it's relational databases, and it's trying to track down all this information to build your report, you're taxing the system significantly. And in doing so, you're affecting how other users are able to access that information, among other things. So what an OLAP Cube will do is it'll take some of those common questions, they will build data sets that exist out there, and essentially you go and ask for your data set, and it's already pre-compiled. It's already ready to go, so it's more instantaneous, and it saves a lot of cost associated with taxing a system for those queries. So we're on a much smaller scale for this assignment going to do something very similar, just to learn a little bit more about it. So it is a relatively simple assignment. Again, this is in your MIS 2013 book, Chapter 9, 9-1. You're going to have to download the Excel spreadsheet, Chapter 9, EX01U6E, and that you'll find that in doc sharing. So that'll provide you with a file that looks like what you're seeing right in front of me. Now, notice I highlighted the data that I want to create a pivot table for. Again, I'm using Office 365. You may be using a different version. The instructions in the book are slightly different than my version of Office, but I'm going to show you in Office 365. If you have a slightly earlier version, the directions in the book may be a little more conducive to following, but essentially it's the same thing. So I'm going to the Data tab, and I'm going to create a pivot table, and I'm choosing Create Automatic Pivot Table. Alright, so now I have the pivot table builder, and it's already thrown in a couple options here. The book asks us to put the vendor name and employee name. I'm going to kill the date field for now, and I'm going to add ratings in the values. So this example is based on a database that was created under the Chapter 8 section, so they refer to Chapter 8.2 in the example. But we have reviews that have been provided on different vendors by people within the organization. So multiple reviews on Ace Holding. We've got Adam Smith, Fred Mertz, Ned Jones, and then we have the grand total of those review values, and the same below based on each individual. Now with this table and our pivot table builder, we can manipulate it further, and don't worry if you do mess up the pivot table, it's fairly simple to redo. When I created the pivot table, it automatically threw it in a different sheet, so we still have the data on a different sheet. But let's start manipulating this pivot table a little bit further. Let's take the date, and first we'll put it on top of the row labels. And notice that it shows on 3/31 Adam Smith inserted this review. On 4/1, Ned Jones inserted this review. And we can go on down the list. We can go on down the list and we can see the different dates that reviews were submitted. If you put the date below, you'll notice that it organizes it vendor first, then the date, which is a lot easier to read. So we see the vendor Ace Holding with the review dates alongside with who made the review when and the totals for those for either those individuals or the review dates. So this is a very simple example of an OLAP Cube. It certainly can get more complex, but this is a good introductory example of it.